Welcome to the Dynamics of Everyday Life, where we demystify some tricky concepts and get to know ourselves a little bit better. Welcome back to the Dynamics of Everyday Life. Today's title is taken from a conversation I had with a friend many years ago. We were chatting about something inconsequential, and she just exclaimed, "Diane never looks up," which was a reference to an issue she'd had with someone on her team that we'd been discussing previously. After a pause, we then went back to what we'd been talking about before this moment of revelation struck her. This line has always stuck with me, as I've often thought what a good book title it would make, although I've no plans to write any novels at the moment. But who knows what will happen in the future? However, when planning out my podcast episodes, I realised that I could finally use this line that I've been storing away for many years, just in case. It goes to show that you should never really throw things out, just in case you need them. Unless it's the ancient bespoke curtains from a previous house that my mother had been saving because she liked them. I discovered these when I was helping my parents downsize and wondered what they were being kept for. I did point out that we were not the Von Trapps and she was not going to be fashioning a set of play clothes from these curtains for us, and into the donations pile they went. But I digress. When the phrase "Diane never looks up" was first mentioned, what my friend was referring to was that Diane had not been bothering to look in a particular place. It made me start to think how often we do that. The phrase that "there's none so blind as them who will not see" comes to mind. I've been considering what is actually going on for us here and have come up with a few options. We don't want to look because we're frightened of what we might find. Some things are out of our field of vision and we've never been taught or instructed to look there. We're comfortable in our routines, which is linked to us being in our comfort zones. And we're overwhelmed, so we're sticking to our own path. In terms of some psychodynamic theory, I'm drawn back to the concepts of defence mechanisms and the repetition compulsion. These concepts have their purpose, and in some cases, defence might be doing us huge favours. Let's break this down a bit more, so we can work out what might be happening for us in cases when we're actually not looking up, consciously or unconsciously. I'm going to branch out a little bit today into the world of Melanie Klein, as well as Freud. I'm never going to be far from him, and I'm sure plenty of analysts would have something to say about that. Full disclosure here, in that I don't know as much about Klein as I do Freud, but I'm all about the learning. Melanie Klein was an Austrian-British author and psychoanalyst, mainly known for her work in child analysis and object relations theory. She came into conflict with Freud's daughter, Anna Freud, who was also a leading child analyst at the time, as they had different understandings of various concepts. Whilst the history is interesting, that's not what we're looking at here. So let's focus on Klein's ideas on defence, in particular that of denial. Klein's understanding of denial is linked to the ideas of omnipotence and annihilation. What we wish to do when we deny something is to obliterate it from our psychic structures. There's an element of violence to this. We're not just avoiding or ignoring the existence of something, we're destroying it because we really don't want it in our worlds. It can also be linked to the defence mechanism of idealisation, where we only see the good sides to someone or something because we have denied, or obliterated, any of the things that we don't like about that, leaving only the good elements. For Klein, this would mean that we're left with an unspoilt good object. Whilst we might feel good, at least temporarily, we're splitting ourselves off from reality. So even if Diane isn't looking up, it doesn't mean to say that what's up there isn't up there at all. What Diane is doing, through the lens of Klein's idea of denial, is by not looking up, she's destroying in her mind what is up there, whatever that is, and in doing that, she is keeping herself free from psychic distress. Freud, however, concentrated on the idea of repression, where we initially acknowledge the existence of the unpleasant fact or issue, but we push it into our unconscious so that we don't have to face it. Diane might have looked up at one point, and when she didn't like what she saw there, she locked it tight away in her unconscious mind so that she wouldn't have to consider it was there. She's repressed her knowledge and her memory of what she saw, and if it's not in her conscious mind, then she doesn't have to deal with it. In either way of considering this, what we're doing is sticking our heads in the sand to keep ourselves safe, because this is what defence mechanisms are set up to do. And even if they aren't working for us right now, at the time they became part of our psychic structure, there was a very real reason for it. So let's not be too hard on ourselves. Let's now sidestep into the repetition compulsion. The repetition compulsion is a widely debated theory in psychoanalytic literature, but for our purposes today, let's use the concept as one where we repeat difficult and traumatic events to try and work through them to master them. In repeating something, we're attempting to gain control over it. Diane is trying to gain control over the situation by never looking up. Maybe Diane is compelled to repeat looking at this level because she's trying to ensure that when the event recurs, which in this understanding of the concept we're working on the premise that it will, that she will be able to control it this time. Were she to look up, then she would not be able to try to gain mastery over it. Perhaps Diane has been surprised by something in the past and now feels that she always has to be on her guard. By looking up, this would mean that she was not concentrating on the here and now, and she'd be putting herself at risk of the same thing happening again. Diane could be rationalising her reasons for never looking up. She could be considering that when she looked up before it didn't go well for her, and so best not to do it again. In this case, Diane is fully aware that she's not looking up. She's actively choosing not to, probably knowing that she really should, but giving herself very good reasons, at least in her mind, as to why she's not doing this. There are also some other reasons that Diane might not be looking up. She may never have been instructed to do this, or seen other people looking up, and realise that this was something that she perhaps ought to consider doing. I know that remote working is very much part of our life since the pandemic. However, one of the aspects of going into the office that I think we're missing out on hugely is watching other people work. How do people communicate? Getting an email from someone with no idea of the intonation behind how it was written is very different to sticking your head round someone's door and having a quick word with them. Additionally, Diane might be very comfortable in her own routine. She may have no desire to look up, either metaphorically or literally. Sometimes we're paralysed by the fear of success, and this can keep us from looking up or imagining ourselves in a different position. It could also be that she's a bit overwhelmed right now, and by her not looking up, she's keeping to the path that works best for her, and it's what she can manage. When I work with students who are learning to become coaches, one of the things that I hear most often is that they're overwhelmed, and this is unsurprising. The coaching world is a very inclusive place, which is great. It's got a come and join the party vibe. There's room by the pool, the bar, the dance floor, etc. And that's absolutely brilliant. Except it can lead to comparisonitis, as we can see what everyone else is doing and worry if we aren't doing that, even if it's down a completely different path to the one that we've planned for ourselves. So my advice is always to focus on what you're doing and not worry about other people. In this case, I'd tell Diane not to look up. My invitation for you this week is for you to consider where in your life you might not be looking up and have a think about what the reasons for this might be. Could it be that there are things that you've shoved into your unconscious because you don't want to think about them? Have you obliterated these things because they are way too painful to consider? Or are you overwhelmed and only able to think about one area of your life right now? Give yourself some grace around this. These can be new areas that we're exploring, and it can make us feel uncomfortable. And that's okay. We may decide that, like Diane, we're better off not looking up. Or it might be that we think maybe it's time to start, even if it's just with a quick glance. Looking at ourselves at this level can be challenging and unnerving as we develop our awareness, so I'd always encourage that you do this at your own speed. If you feel you need some extra help around this, then I've put together a PDF resource sheet and you can find the link for this in the show notes. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Dynamics of Everyday Life. Please hit the follow button for future episodes and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You can follow me on Instagram at The Dynamics of Everyday Life or find me on LinkedIn at Julia Rogers. I'd love to hear from you and hear your thoughts on dynamics. The Dynamics of Everyday Life is brought to you by Coaching 42 and the fabulous team at the Podcast Boutique.